Welcome to Season 4 of the K4 Business Podcast.
Today's show is brought to you by our K4B Profit Snapshot. Here's one question worth sitting with. If you stepped away from your business for 30 days, would it grow or contract? That answer tells you a lot about where you really stand. Try the free 5-minute snapshot. It measures process, profit, and personal freedom. Link is in the show notes.
So, question to the audience. How do you write a book that actually brings clients without wasting time, money, or burning you out? That's what our guest will be talking about in this episode. He'll break down the biggest book mistakes experts make, how to protect your intellectual property, also called IP, avoid expensive publishing traps, and launch with momentum so your book builds authority and attracts opportunities before it's even finished. If you've been sitting on a book idea and this is your nudge, listen in, take notes, and start moving, and your message from someday to now. Our guest today is Ben Gioia. He's the founder of Influence with a Heart and Leadership Awake Press, where he helps purpose-driven consultants, coaches, and small business owners turn their expertise into a powerful, client-attracting book in just 5 weeks. While many experts wait for the perfect time to publish, Ben teaches them how to build authority and attract high-level opportunities before their book is even finished, leading to stages like Harvard, paid engagements with companies like Google, and 5- and 6-figure contracts. A 4-time international best-selling author, Ben has trained hundreds of millionaires at Stanford and even created a mindfulness and empathy-based video game used by 20,000 employees worldwide. His work blends strategy, storytelling, and heart-centered leadership to help experts step out of invisibility and into meaningful influence. After surviving 4 near-death experiences in just 72 hours during a trek in India, Ben returned with a deeper conviction: life is short, your message matters, and the world needs your voice now, not someday. Ben, absolute pleasure. I'm glad you're on this side of the fence from India. Not that going to India was a problem, but 4 times. Wow. Welcome. What's your favorite quote or saying?
I think on that, so first of all, thank you for being here, having me here, Bernie, and thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you. I think my quote during that India time was, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to die. And, that was several years ago. So today, my favorite quote is one that I wrote myself, and it is, a light mind is the right mind to write. So once again, a light mind is the right mind to write.
A little melody in that whole sentence.
Isn't that
Shakespeare happening.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that very much. On the second time I was in India, I had the really fascinating, painful experience of doing a 9-day hike with blisters on my Achilles tendons. Basically misery for about 144,000 steps, I think is how I calculated it. But from that experience, I ultimately discovered, which is something that our friend, the historical Buddha, has been teaching, right, or taught and passed down, right, that difference between pain and suffering. Right? We as human beings, we will experience pain. That's part of, that's in the contract for this existence. But the suffering part is optional, can be reduced, can often be eliminated. So I discovered that in India way back when, and then over the years have applied that to the book writing process to really help people understand that you don't have to suffer for or through the process of your book.
Wow. Or get blisters on your Achilles tendon and go for a long walk in sweltering heat. So waiting to publish was dangerous is kind of the point being made, or that you're highlighting based on your intro. Why is it dangerous to wait? Is it more like the student that goes, I finished high school, maybe I'll take a year off, eh? Is that type of scenario?
It could be, although frankly, I wish after high school I took a year off, right? That would have been quite nice. No, I encourage people, hurry up and write your book, but don't rush, right? That fine balance, that fine dance, because the power and the efficacy of one's book, right, to open the doors to clients, referral partners, strategic partners, and first and foremost, to make an impact. And for me, not only do I recommend get your book into the world as soon as possible, but actually start leveraging the book while you're still writing it, right? Use the book as a reason to have conversations with your ideal clients so you can talk about the book that you're writing, right? And know from the proverbial horse's mouth, your ideal clients, what actually to put in the book, right? So you don't actually take a guess when you're publishing the book. It's going to work before you bring it into the world.
You just triggered about 4 or 5 questions automatically, the scroll inside. Oh, ask this question next. So is this a little bit of pay attention to the ego? You think you know what your customer wants, but check as you build, like Like when you build a house, the plan says this, it ain't gonna work because there's a boulder in the way or a tree in the way, and you don't want to cut the tree or move the boulder, right? So is that an ego check?
Yeah, it is an ego check. It's also best practices. Just, marketing is critical for all of us to do in our businesses, right? But to do it from a place of integrity, from a place of service. And one of the highest levels of service you can provide is actually to talk to your ideal clients and say, hey, what are your challenges? What are you struggling with? What are you trying to achieve? What's been working? What hasn't been working? Right? And give them a chance to give voice to their challenges and be a really, really good listener, because that in and of itself can provide a transformation.
So when you say the other question I had as we were unfolding this, you say book. Are we talking print? Are we talking electronic? Mixed bag?
Yes, we're,
I,
we're, we're
I,
talking, to use your term, we are talking mixed bag. So
so yeah, sorry, go ahead.
that's okay. Thank you. So these days, thanks to our friend, the internet, right, and technologies that are available to people like you and me, when we bring our book to the world, it's easy and not any more expensive to provide it as softcover paperback, hardcover paperback, and ebook/Kindle. And you want to make sure to do all three, partially because your readers will choose different ways to consume the book. But number two, and this is what is most important to this. So if you're listening, keep listening right now, right? Get your book into people's hands, right? Give it away as much as you can, even if you're spending a few bucks on the book, right? It's totally worth it because your book will open the doors. Your book will position you as an expert or authority long before people even have read it. People might not even read your book and assume that you're an expert in your stuff because you wrote a book about it.
Interesting. So we again from reading the bio and the IP, the intellectual property. So are you at risk at losing it's almost like if you had a secret sauce. It's just like you as a business. And in assuming that you, the persona, is not just the only secret sauce, because if you're looking to scale, right, you want to have a standard operating procedure so that you can rinse and repeat this with other people. How do you manage the IP so that it doesn't get lost in the wild? Because some people go, the greatest, what's the expression is the greatest form of flattery is mimicking you or
Sure.
copying you.
Yeah. So thank you for asking. There's a few layers of answer to that. So on the one hand, invariably people, in mimicking, people steal people's stuff, right? Sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. So that's just going to be, that's just part of the world we live in, right? Everything's visible, almost everything's visible. So of course that's going to happen. And you want to do the best you can to protect your intellectual property, right? Your books, your ideas, your courses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the biggest way you can do that with your book is to not, keyword here is not, use a traditional publisher to publish your book. Okay. So what I mean by this, when I say traditional publisher, most people who are in our generation and nearby, when they think of publishing a book, they think of what we all grew up with, right? Oh, I want to get my book published. I need to seek out a publisher. I might need an agent. I have to create a book proposal. And then I have to shop the book around and hope that somebody picks my book. And traditional publishing is still out there, but for people like you and me, for the impact we want to make, the way we want to do our business, the freedom we want to have, it's much better to not use a traditional publisher, because with a traditional publisher, as soon as you sign the contract, they immediately become the owner of your book, right? So literally you give up full rights to your book as soon as you sign the contract. So that means creative control, strategic control, timeline control, business control, editorial control. Ultimately, you have no control. Hopefully, they're asking you for your input, right? Because it's your book, but technically they don't even really have to do that. So much better than traditional publishing 99% of the time, and that's not hyperbole, is what I like to call professional self-publishing, right? So you've probably heard the term self-publishing. It's a misnamed, unfortunately, it's a misnamed process, because self-publishing does not mean publish it yourself. It does not mean do it yourself, right? Like, don't fix your own electric, don't fix your own septic tank, right? Get a professional publishing team to do the work to publish your book. But you want to retain the ownership, the royalties, IP, everything under your accounts. So professional self-publishing is the way to go.
Just as you said, you don't fix your own, and I'm thinking of 220 volts. I mean, here in North America, right, which is the amperage or the voltage for, let's say, a dryer or a stove. And just one screwdriver across, you shorten the tip of the screwdriver if you short out this. Anyhow, I
Yeah.
segued and I'm coming back. So the book itself, are we talking about book like fiction, nonfiction? A mixed bag does this matter? If you have an idea, like if you have a Genesis, let's say you're the new Tolkien, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
you want to spin a tale. Is this the
Yeah.
space for you, or is it more for the coaches and the entrepreneurs?
So historically, it's more often for the coaches, the entrepreneurs, the consultants, et cetera, right? So a book that positions one as an expert, helps to tell the story, share the message, and opens the door to the relationships that turn into clients, partners, and referrals. So yes, that's true. So traditionally, more often for coaches, consultants, leaders, et cetera, to have a book that positions them as an expert, gives them an opportunity to share their message, tell their story, develop the relationships that turn into business and impact. And in this day and age, there are many different kinds of books, right? It's not just fiction and nonfiction, right? There are business fables, right? There are memoirs with business lessons in them, right? There's all sorts of configurations, and breaking in, especially with a fiction book and working toward high numbers of book sales is really difficult and really expensive. Right. So entering that space or working in that space and operating a little bit differently will often open the doors. Like if you have a fiction book, let's say a science fiction book, right? Why not develop relationships with event coordinators for science fiction events, right? See if you can get your book into the event. So, of course, try to sell in a bookstore, but selling books is difficult, expensive, time consuming, and doesn't always, especially with business book, doesn't yield big outcomes, right? So I say whenever you can use a book to develop or deepen a relationship versus just selling the book, go for the relationship.
So my quick analogy is then that the fiction or just broad public appeal is kind of a shotgun approach versus a laser focused approach on I'm looking for this type of clients. So I'm getting that piece as I unfold into the book a little bit deeper, and other things come to mind because it depends on the intent of the book, right? Does it position you, and then what? Versus does it position you and here's a course, versus by the way, here is something that can be of service to you and you can tap into it, and where there might be a subscriber fee attached to it. How do you shape that book? So if someone rolls up at your door and says, I'm here, I got me an idea, and I got a story to tell, and I have a way to help, a helping hand. How do you help take that person going, okay, and the next step, aside from writing and getting the process flowing, getting the feedback, how do you strategize, the kind of the end game of the book itself, not necessarily your end game, but the end game of the book?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic question. So a few pieces of that. One, certainly, and this is worth me repeating, is having conversations with one's ideal clients, right? To get that clarity, because that always turns into good stuff, clarity for the book, clients, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other part is to think if your book is like a bridge or a stepping stone, right? What kind of things, what kind of outcomes are you looking for? Like, is it coaching? Is it clients? Is it consulting? Is it mentoring? Is it speaking? So, yes to all of those things, right? And in the book, you want to give your reader, who most of the time is your ideal client in this context, you want to give them a sense of what it's like to work with you, right? So you help people go from A to Z, right? How do you give them the experience of going from A to Z in the spaces of your book without overwhelming them, without giving away the farm, and without them thinking, oh my God, there's 26 steps, A to Z. You're like, hey, let me show you how this works in 5 steps, or, in this 4-part framework, or whatever the case may be. Because having spoken to people about their challenges regarding the topic of your book, you get the language that they're using, right? And you get the clarity, and you weave that into the book. So they really understand, your reader really understands that you get them, right? And then you couple that with giving them an experience of what it's like to work with you, right? Using case studies as stories in your book, right? Speaking to your own results, not as a way to boast and say, look at all the things I did, right? But look at the kind of results that Mary's organization received. They came to me with this kind of challenge, right? We identified this, we implemented this. Here's what happened immediately, and here's what I'm hearing from Mary 18 months later. those kinds of things.
You ever find that you have a client, and I've come across other podcast guests, and what they do, they have someone who's has the essence of brilliance over here, and in
Mhm.
this particular case, they help them talk to the finance people versus the end user people, and each has a certain language that fits. The
Sure.
person is the genius. If they were to approach the funding source, they they get a couple blinks and then no coin, right? And so
Right.
there has to be like an interpreter in the middle of it.
Mhm.
Do you provide that? Do you provide that clarity so that if because every trade, every profession, every even when I'm writing an email and I realize afterwards, I write it in my headspace, and then sometimes I'll go to ChatGPT. Can you provide some clarity in it? I'm going same words, except just moved around a bit.
Sure.
How do you get that the message comes across without losing the person? Because if you wanted to work with me, right, you still have to have. I'm going to be me, right, when I show up. So
Absolutely.
how do you balance that so that the message is clear, but at the same time you're not lost in translation?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to repeat myself again. A lot of the clarity comes from the conversations with one's ideal clients, right? Like, if I can say to my author, my client, "Hey, how are they describing their challenge? Like, what's the biggest stuff?" Right? So, then we can both agree.
Yeah.
Here's the language. Here's what this person is talking about. Those kinds of things. And then I do a quite a deep. I do a process called a book ecosystem mapping session before we even start writing the book, and we really look at the big picture of the book, hence the word ecosystem. So not only the audience and the content, but looking at the challenges and the opportunities about writing, what it really takes to execute a high quality book and do it fast, right? Because we want to get it out there. We want to make an impact. Right? Looking at the publishing, looking at, okay, now your book is in the world. What the heck do you do with it? Right? Looking at those things, the ecosystem on the book, we start there. And then I have an opportunity to really understand this person's vision, their idea for the book, and all these kinds of things. And I asked them a ton of questions to really, really for me to understand, and to get their language. And, there is a little bit of a dance with certain people sometimes in that, they have some genius idea or genius essence and, they don't quite have the words for it, or they have their words just like Bernie are giving voice to. And I'll just keep asking them and keep saying, okay, I don't quite understand, and I don't, not poking and prodding and trying to be a pain in the butt, but yeah, just kind of keep unpacking it and keep unpacking it. And then at some point I say, well, is it this? And they'll go, yeah. And I go, okay, right, let's keep that. Here's our North Star for the book.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, flourishy marketing language that's hyperbole and all that. How do we articulate the topic of one's book? And I say this to my authors, 2 sentences or less, right? I'm writing this kind of book for these kind of people to create this kind of outcome or some variation in there. Right. Because we want to be able to speak the truth when we speak the topic of our book. So when we reach out to our ideal clients and say, hey, I'm writing a book about such and such a topic, right? The description of the book resonates with those ideal clients, right? Not specifically, oh, I'm going to buy that book, but yeah, I'd totally be willing to chat with you, Ben, about the book. That sounds great. Does that make sense?
No, you're you're enunciating and you're great clarity. Just a sidebar, when I some of the questions I'll ask is because if the audience, and so I'll take the audience perspective. Okay, I don't understand this piece, and
Sure.
some stuff. So that's why you might have. It seems like he's circling back. Well, it's
That's
because
okay. Yeah.
so for the person that has the idea and has the, I want to write a book. What do they delay? Like, what have you found that's happening, and what are the triggers that if they go, I want to write a book, I'm not there. What are the flags that should tell them to go? "Well, let's reach out to Ben and see if this has some traction."
Yeah, that's a great question. Recently, I appreciate you asking me this today. Recently, there's been a bit of serendipity where several people have said to me, about a week ago, I wasn't thinking about writing a book, and then I saw some of your content, and I realized I want to write a book. Right, so that's been fun to have, explore that with some people. Other people, sometimes they're following my content, sometimes they've just stumbled upon me, or somebody made a referral, and I spend a lot of my, how shall I say, content delivery time, teaching time, right? Not just for my clients, but anytime I'm bringing content out into the world, just continually trying to help people understand that it's totally doable to do a book, right? That we all grew up, not we all, many of us grew up thinking it's like, oh, you got to become an alcoholic to write a book, right? Like all, Dylan Thomas, Ernest Hemingway, right? All of these models, right? And it's not true, first and foremost. And oh my God, I'm not a good writer. Well, you're not a good writer, then use your voice to dictate parts of your book, right? If not the whole book, because in 5 minutes of dictation, and hey, you're an expert in your stuff, you know what the heck you're talking about. In 5 minutes, you can have 750 words, and 750 words is 3% of a 160-page book. So you start going, I can actually dictate a rough draft of my 160-page book in 33 days, right? And then suddenly the doors open in such a big way.
So, have you found in the process, are there any points where people are on, I can do my own book, and they kind of shove off the dock and they're in a leaky boat that they end up making mistakes that hurt them in the long term, in the long game, right? Or they've given away the IP, which we've kind of already touched on. Are there any really costly mistakes that some people have made that you've seen?
Oh, yeah, so many. I mean, I'm laughing, because I'm sad for them, right? So one tremendous mistake is not talking to your ideal clients about the book, right? Big surprise that I'm saying that. Another big mistake is using a traditional publisher. Another big mistake is using a publisher and not reading the contract in depth, clearly, completely, and then recognizing that, oh, the publisher is only publishing the book, which most publishers do, but they're not providing any marketing, any strategy, any launch support, any business development, any revenue creation, right? So for me, I say to people, hey, if you're going to get your book done, get a complete solution to the book, right? Get the business development, the writing, the editing, the publishing, the launch, the strategy, the whole kind of thing. Get the whole pizza pie, right? Because there are plenty of people out there who are like, here's this slice of pizza and we swear it's going to feed your whole family and we want to charge you $25,000 for it or more, and nothing, right? Just
Cardboard.
crickets on Amazon, and it's so disheartening. And I say to people, you make a mistake with your book, right? You can lose 10 years and millions of dollars in opportunity cost. Yeah.
Do you fold artwork into this thing too? Because if something comes out, it looks like a brick. You got to make it look pretty, right? You got to put some eyeballs on there and some, frills. And I mean, I'm joking. Obviously, it's not going to be a brick. It's going to be a statue, right? But what do you provide a source around that too?
Yeah. So one version of that is some most times people come to me for my help when they have an idea for the book, right? So way at the beginning of the process, or they have a little bit written, right? Every once in a while, somebody comes in the middle of the process, and then every once in a while, somebody comes and they're like, "Ben, I have a manuscript. Like, can you publish it?" And I look at it and I'm like, "Not yet," right? And we have to really put the brakes on it. And they're so excited because they've worked so hard and they've done a great job on creating the content for the book, right? But probably because most of the time this happens, they haven't had the conversations with their ideal clients, right? So I will stop them and implore them, gently yell at them to go do that and make sure they're not missing anything, right? Right? They're not putting things that don't need to be in there, and they're using the opportunity strategically to develop relationships that can turn into, revenue and partnerships and all that good kind of stuff.
So, what's the typical life cycle of the genesis to hi, I'm an expert. I want to write. I've touched a touch base with Ben, and yeah, that's a ticket. And to ta-da, I mean, the book's evolution in itself is already part of the marketing strategy, and
Mhm.
affirmation that, you're on the right track to completion. And regardless whether you're doing a course, a survey, whatever the case might be, what's that life cycle look like?
Gosh, so several
Typically.
answers. Yeah, thank you. So several
You're
answers to
welcome.
that. Yeah, what one is, I have some clients who, I've been chatting with, poking, for 4 or 5 years, right? And then I get a message and they're like, Ben, I'm ready. Right. So the suddenly the time comes, right? So there's some of those people, and I'm not trying to classify or judge, nothing like that at all, but there's some people do it like that. And then there's some people who I encounter and they all of a sudden they're like, okay, I gotta do it. Either because they have a driving internal feeling that comes up, it's like, I gotta do the thing, or they're out there doing business development and they're recognizing, like, as a speaker or as a consultant, that for positioning and for being selected for work, they need to have the book. Right. It's, it's almost like, you got to wear the uniform, right? You got to have the book as a speaker consultant. And of course, this is not every single person all the time, but it helps so much, right? Because, we human beings, we have capital B book, right? Embedded in our psyches, right? Because it was like stories around the fire, right? And then some cave paintings. And then somebody was like, let's make a couple of books, right? Let's, do a little papyrus. And then, got into books. And then, books were the thing for, I don't know, is it 1,000 years, several hundred years? I can't remember you know, when Gutenberg had his day, but that assumption, if you will, that knee-jerk reaction, like, hey, I just wrote a book. Oh, you wrote a book. You must know something, right? People just assume, right? There's this fantastic story quite a few years ago of a woman wrote a book called The Complete Guide to Everything That Men Know About Women. Okay, and the book is completely blank.
Well,
And
the fact you can recognize a woman is part of it. If you have the ability to discern that much, you know at least one thing.
very, very okay, fair enough. And she made, I can't remember if she made $1 million from the book or sold 1 million books. Either way, tremendous success at that point for her. I don't recommend writing a blank book, right? Because we have messages to share and stories to bring out into the world, but that we can piggyback or leverage the inherent power of book, capital B. And what I teach my authors, I keep talking about this, conversations about the book before the book is done. When you enter that conversation, literally you get on the phone and you're coming onto the phone as the author of the book, even though the book isn't written yet. And so the person you're talking to thinks you're the author because you're the author of the forthcoming book. So they assume you know something about something because you're an author.
So is this also how you get the 5 to 6 figure engagements, public speaking engagements? Then, and
Absolutely.
how do you merge it up? Do you? I've talked to Ben. Now I got to go find me a publicist, or do I need to find me? Because you just said something earlier when you're talking about it, right? You know your stuff, but you don't know all the other stuff. You know about the other stuff, but you don't know it in depth. It's sort of like if you start a business, you have to have an accountant, you have to have a lawyer, depending on what you're doing. So I'm in Ben's caring arms and guidance, and I'm spinning the dial, and we're about to go wheels up and in the air. What's the next step? Like, how do you transition there?
Yes. So the first step is the conversations with the ideal clients. The way I teach it is 12 questions, about 20 minutes. Question 11 is the revenue question. And it's simply, hey, after the book, would you like to hang out some more? Right? It's some version of that. It's not suddenly a sales pitch, but it's just a logical next conversation. Hey, now that we've spoken about this book and about this topic that we both care deeply about, for example, after the book, if I do a workshop, do you think that might be something that would be supportive for your team? Yeah, Ben, that actually would be. Cool, fantastic. Well, I got a little bit more work to do on the book, but why don't I circle back in about 3-4 weeks? I'll have, I should be through the final draft at that point, and then I can let you know what I'm thinking about the workshop at that point. How does that sound? Right. So that kind of approach, collegial, peer-to-peer. I have clients who've gotten 5-figure workshops from doing that, 6-figure consulting fees, $50,000 coaching programs, promises of different kinds of partnerships, media appearances, all kinds of things. Right. Sometimes the check didn't clear, as it were, for quite a few months from the conversation, because maybe that person's ideal client is a big organization, and very often, negotiating with them, getting the agreement in place, then getting them to pay you, that could take 9 months. But, the seed of that started 9 months before, right? So Bernie, when you introduced me today, and we talked about the video game, right? I put up when I was frantic. So let me back this up a little bit. 2016, I had an opportunity to speak at Stanford University. I
Yeah.
don't know how the hell they found me, but somebody reached out and was like, "Hey, Ben, you want to speak at Stanford?" And I'm like, "Yes, of course I do." And they're like, "Great." And we figure out the curriculum, we signed the contract. And I said, "Great. I'm really excited to come speak. By the way, I'm going to show up with autographed copies of my brand new book for all of the participants. So like 130 free books." Right? The audience is coming literally from Sydney, Australia. I'm like, they're coming from the other side of the world. Let me make this special. Great. The event planner says, "Thank you so much. They're going to love it." I said, "You're welcome." I hung up the phone and I went, "Oh, crap, I have to write that book right now. And
Gestation, of rapid gestation.
oh my goodness, so rapid gestation. I was literally pulling the plant from the ground. So from the promise to when I had to deliver the books and deliver the presentation, I had 6.5 weeks. Yeah. So I wrote, produced, printed, and shipped the book in 6.5 weeks, got the book back, signed them all. The event went really well. The event planning company hired me 3 more times, twice at Stanford, I think once at University of Washington. The audience company hired me the following year to speak in Sydney, Australia, because every single person in the company had a copy of my book, right? Don't sell books from the back of the room as a speaker. Give everybody a book, right? Yeah.
You touched on it when you realize, hey, I have X number of weeks, 6 weeks to, ta-da, here's a book and signed. Is there an issue sometimes you find with some people? It's like when you're getting married, right? Everybody's really positive about it, but the day of, the anxiety levels build up, and depending on the dynamics of people involved and, how much hoopla that's coming into play, the stress levels go up. Do you find that how do you launch without going, I'm just exhausted. I've just drained myself and not in a good way. I think it's one thing to drain yourself in a happy moment, but it's another one that, I'm happy, but oh my gosh, I've lost a pound of flesh out of the deal.
Totally. Yep. So that's a fantastic question. So I approach that in 3 ways. So the first one goes back to what we said at the beginning of this conversation, right? A light mind is the right mind to write, right? A light mind is the right mind to do pretty much everything, to lead, to have difficult conversations, to navigate grief, like all of it. And the way I help my authors have a light mind is I teach them a smiling meditation, and I remind them to smile literally all the time throughout the day, right? Because when we're happy, we smile, of course, but we can make ourselves happier. And so one of the things I teach my authors to do is to meditate, to do a smiling meditation, and to smile as much as possible throughout the day. And you, listener, viewer, can do this too. Literally, the more you smile, the better your life will be, the better your business will be, right? Because we smile when we're happy, but we also can become happy and lighten our mind by smiling. Right? There's a neurobiological feedback loop that works really well. And this is so important because invariably with one's book, you are stirring the pot. So there are going to be emotions and memories and feelings and uncomfortableness and all kinds of things coming up. And for most people, that's the stuff that stops them. That's the stuff that drives them to the bottle or, whatever else to dampen the pain. And the trick here, as it were, or the tactic here, as it were, is to smile, relax, like literally do what the Buddha taught. Don't get involved with the impersonal experience that's popping up, right? Just let it be over there and, sooner or later it burns itself out. So that's number one. Number two is I recommend to my authors and anybody who will listen to me that they strategically separate their book release from their bestseller activity. Right. So a lot of people are like, I'm releasing my book. And the next day they're like, help me be a bestseller. Right. And what happens is they lose a big strategic opportunity because it's 2 events that they've squished into one. Right. And to the point of being burnt out, tired, ragged, all the words, you've just written a freaking book. Right. You might have been carrying that book around with you for 40 years, 17 years, right? In your heart, in your head, right? That psychic burden and the privilege of the book and all the things. And you finally bring it into the world. So the first strategic move after you bring in the book into the world is take a vacation. And I'm not kidding. I say that to all my authors. I'm like, take a vacation the day after you release the book, because there's plenty of work to do coming forward, plenty of opportunity to utilize the book. I mean, years, if not decades, into the future. Right now, take a break. If you can't go on vacation the day after, just sit around the house and watch a lot of Netflix, maybe get a massage, right? But like chill out, veg out, the whole thing, and then get back into the book. And then instead of doing the bestseller launch right at the same time, do it like 2 to 4 months after you release the book. Because in those 2 to 4 months, which I call a smart gap, you can send copies of books to people, get books into people's hands, develop relationships with people, get on podcasts, right? Do events, all those kinds of things. And then 2 to 4 months later, you have all these relationships built. Maybe you have already a couple of new clients. And then you have an array of people who will be available to support you when you do your bestseller activity 2 to 4 months later. And so much more happens because People often forget this about book launches and bestseller launches. Of course, it's about, bestseller launch. Of course, there's the status of being a bestseller. Great. But more importantly, it's the relationships that you develop thanks to the activity that make the big difference and really move the needle in a profound way.
So we kind of touched on, people that are in business, they've been coaches or, whatever spectrum in the business world they're in. But for those that are like, hi, I'm 20 something, or, I've just come up with a brand new piece of SaaS software, or I'm working corporate and I'm now ready to hit the escape button and parachute out and start doing something different.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's a career switch coming in, and not necessarily even corporate. They've been doing one thing, and going, I'm tired of this. I want to do something more exciting that's going to be enlightening my life.
Sure.
How do you get them to shift in? Because they're not coming in necessarily, in some instances, not a lot of experience, or their experience is limited to the box they came from, right? And they're about to venture out into something that's new territory, where they might
Yeah.
have skill set for it, so they're a developing expert. How do you make sure that they're on the right path and they just don't go up, up, and then there's no ground underneath them?
Yeah, great question. Fantastic question. And I certainly encourage anyone who's thinking of leaving the corporate world to try it, right? You can always go back if you have to, but it's worth trying stepping away from the corporate world. And I'm saying this, not having been in it for the last 17 years, a little smile on my face. So, and either way, and I'm not disparaging anybody for being in the corporate world, but as you're transitioning, whether it's out of corporate to another career, et cetera, you know, here's what I want to do or what I think I want to do. Here's the vision or dream, and that's great. And do that and figure out who that's for and talk to those people, right? But keep in mind, the skills and the things that you have already that can translate and be applicable over here. Like, don't just trash all the things from the past, right? So I had a 8-year magazine production history. I grew up in New York around the city, right? So I worked on, as an adult, well, that was debatable, but, after university, I worked on some really big global magazine titles, Modern Bride, Condé Nast Traveler, the AARP membership magazine. I actually helped launch that, right? And that career and those successes and outcomes, of which there were thankfully many, I left the magazine world in 2003, right? So 23 years ago. And still in my bio, one of the last lines is, and he helped launch one of the world's biggest magazines, AARP, right? So there are skills and there's story and there's experience and there's credibility and there's gravitas and all these kinds of things from something way back when. And when I left the corporate world, I left because I wanted to make a bigger difference in the world. And AARP, is a nonprofit. Sure. I mean, it serves 65 million people over 50 or some amazing thing like that. That's awesome. But I was still doing a magazine production job, which I love, but I wasn't feeling the connection directly to the people. So I left that and I worked for several years with an NGO, serving people with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, right? And that was amazing work on the one hand, but a lot of nonprofits and NGOs suffer from challenges around money and terrible culture and all these kinds of things. And I realized after a couple of years that, hey, the impact that I want to make is not going to come through the NGO. Like, I'm glad they're doing that stuff, but I got to do my own version of this, right? And when I became an entrepreneur 17 years ago, I had almost no idea about anything. I mean, I knew communication things and I knew production things and I knew digital things, but I knew nothing about business, right? I knew really nothing about marketing or sales, all those kinds of things. But yeah, yeah, I stepped forward in some way and and I started learning and I started talking to people and I made a lot of mistakes and all these kinds of things. And my only, I don't want to say regret because it's not a regret, but if I had to do a little bit differently, right? Or if there was one piece of advice that I would say is whatever transition you're making, try to have either, 6 to 9 to 12 months of plenty of money to make that transition, or make the transition and have like a 20-hour a week side gig, because the ups and the downs of the transition and the evolution and trying to nail it in, it might be quick, but often it takes a minute or 17 years, depending who you're talking to, right? So You want to have some income and you don't want to be biting your nails, especially, I mean, I was very fortunate because I've been doing this, I've been a solo operator for many years. Like I don't have kids, right? I don't have a partner. Makes it really easy to do my things because I can just choose for myself, right? But especially if you have family, right? Especially if you have kids and college is coming or whatever else, right? Make the transition because it will be one of the best things you ever do, even if you have to go back to corporate, make the transition, but just make the experience much less intense and much less nail biting for you. You'll be so happy that you did.
Kind of a wrap up question. Budget of time and finances or resources. What should a person allot to, I got an idea and I got to start writing to, ta-da, what should a rough, and again, it all depends. If you're writing the Tolkien series, deep pockets, deep time.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So in the time side of things, you know, you just made the point, Bernie, like there's all sorts of answers to that. But the method that I teach my authors is 20 minutes a day, 6 days a week on your book. Right. Just keep chipping away. And if you're chipping away and, using a process and a blueprint and things like that, and you always know what you're doing, those 20 minutes are epically leveraged. So that's one part. And then number two, budget can certainly range, depending on the complexity of service and the help you're getting and all those kinds of things. And I say to people, I say to some people who work with me, I'll explain my whole process and package and then the kind of things. And they're like, yeah. There's sometimes a little bit of hesitation because maybe they don't have the budget for the full publishing yet, right? Or maybe the idea of publishing is just so overwhelming and are still trying to wrap their head around the book. I'm just like, okay, well, let's just take a first step, right? What's a first step that's going to give you really high leverage results? Big surprise, it's having conversations with your ideal clients about the book. One, because you're going to get clarity about the book, but number two, the people you talk to, they can start providing revenue or referrals or relationships and partnerships, those kinds of things, right? So do that because then, you don't have to be like, oh, I got to put X amount of dollars aside, for this thing. It's like, no, just, a much smaller investment up front, in a process that, very quickly comes back 10x, right? And over the course of years and decades, if you keep utilizing the book, right, will turn into millions of dollars of value from, like just a couple $1,000 at the beginning to get the ball rolling.
I got to say thank you so much. But you know what? Before we get to the sign off phase, how do we find Ben in the wide world at large?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So if you're in the Valencia, Spain area, I'm in Gandia, which is about an hour south of Valencia. There's a direct train, the C1 train. So come down anytime and we can drink coffee. Otherwise, influencewithaheart.com. Once again, influencewithaheart.com. And I can also be found on LinkedIn, Ben Gioia, Gioia. My website, there's a menu item. I think it says tools these days, but there's a bunch of fabulous resources, courses, free stuff and really good things that will help you with your book. You can even apply them today. So check it out. And, if you have any questions, reach out. It's a pleasure to talk to you and just help you get clear with your book, whether I can help you, in the future or not.
Ben, do you have a book?
I have 4 books and have finished the first draft of number 5, and I've just started scratching the surface of my first novel. Five different, what is it? There's 3 tools right there, 1 strategy. Actually, there's 4 tools and 1 strategy phone call there. So basically a ton of resources under that tools menu item.
You know what, Ben? I want to say thank you so much for being a guest. And Ben Goya is a great person to chat with. He is absolutely chill, and he makes the conversation smooth, flowing. And you know what? If you have an idea, you have a powerful idea, and you want to work with clients and you want to help share your knowledge and help benefit everybody, and at the same time, get rewarded for that, reach out to Ben. Make your book have that reach. And it's, whether it's paperback, hard copy, electronic, it's a mixed bag. However, to reach us, you can visit us at Knack4Business, the word Knack, the number 4, and business.com. We even have a little chat bot on the corner that will help you find other resources inside our space.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.